Once, during confession, he tried by all possible means to evoke frankness in this nun. And he got to know, among other things, that this nun novice had had a lover who had once given her his portrait framed in a very beautiful frame, and that she permitted herself during periods of resting from her prayers to admire this picture of her sweetheart, and that, as it seemed to her, the diabolical suggestion proceeded in her just at these said periods of her resting. All this, told frankly by the nun, still further excited the interest of the Abbot Pedrini, and he decided at all costs to find out the cause of it. And with this aim in view, he first of all asked the nun, Euphrosynia, to be sure to bring with her to the next confession the portrait of her sweetheart together with the frame. At the next confession, the nun took with her this said portrait. There was nothing very special about it, but the frame indeed was unusual, it being all encrusted with mother-of-pearl and various colored stones. While the abbot and the nun were together examining the portrait in the frame, the abbot suddenly noticed that something particular began to proceed with the nun. First, she became pale, and for a certain time she became, as it were, petrified. And then there began with her, on the spot, precisely in all details, the same manifestations which proceed there among the newly married at what is called the first night. After all this, the Abbot Pedrini desired still more to make clear to himself all the causes of such an unusual manifestation. But as regards the nun, she recovered 2 hours after the beginning of this particular state of hers, and it was discovered that she knew and remembered nothing of what had happened to her. As the Abbot Pedrini himself alone could not unravel this phenomenon, he turned for help to his acquaintance, a certain Dr. Bambini. Well, when the Abbot Pedrini told everything in detail to the Dr. Bambini, the latter also became very much interested, and from then on they both began to occupy themselves with the elucidation of it all. They first made various elucidating experiments upon the nun Euphrosynia herself, and after several what are called seances, they noticed that this nun invariably fell into such a peculiar state of hers only when her gaze rested rather a long time on one of the brilliant colored stones, on what is called a Persian turquoise, which was among the adornments of the frame of this portrait. But later, with this same Persian turquoise, they continued to make their elucidating experiments upon others. They then soon became categorically convinced, firstly, that in almost any one of the three-brained beings, without distinction of sex, who gazes for a long time at shining and brilliant objects of a certain kind, there begins to proceed a state similar to the one which proceeded with the first subject of their experiments. And secondly, they noticed further that the form of the manifestation of the subject during the state varies and is found to be dependent on the former being experiences which chance to be predominant, and on the shiny objects with which a connection was accidentally established during such an experience of theirs. Well, my boy, when the information concerning such observations, deductions, and experiments of these two beings belonging to the community Italy were spread among the contemporary learned beings of new formation, and many of these latter also began wiseacring about it, and finally, when by chance, as it usually happens among them, they learned that it is possible in beings similar to them, when in this state, to change in an accelerated way the impressions formerly fixed in them to new ones. Then certain of them began to use this particular psychic property inherent in them for the purpose of curing. And from then on, such a means of curing was called by them hypnotic cure, and those beings who were occupied with this means of curing, physician hypnotists. The question as to what this state of theirs is and why it obtains in them remains an open one for them, even up till now, and to reply to it they cannot. From that time on, there began to appear, and there exist till now, hundreds of every possible kind of theory and thousands of thick books devoted to this question, thanks to which the minds of the ordinary three-brained beings of this ill-fated planet, already sufficiently muddled without this, become still more muddled. This branch of their science has perhaps come to be, for them, more maleficent than the fantastic inventions of the ancient Hellenic fishermen and of the contemporary beings of the community Germany. Thanks merely to this branch of their science, there was acquired in the psyche of the ordinary beings of this ill-fated planet several still new forms of what are called being kalkali, that is, essential strivings, which became cast into forms of definite teachings, existing there under the names of Anoclinism, Darwinism, Anthroposophism, Theosophism, and many others under the names also ending with ism, thanks to which even those two data of their presences, which still help them to be at least a little, as it is becoming to three-centered beings to be, finally disappeared in them. And these essential data, which have, until recently, been in them, engendered in them the being impulses they call patriarchality and religiousness. This branch of their contemporary science was the cause not only of the acquiring by their common presences of several further new maleficent kalkali, but it was also the cause of the derangement in many of them of the, without this, abnormal functioning of their psyche, which to their great misfortune was already long before this disharmonized up to the degree of what is called al-Nakurian cacophony. You will understand this well if I tell you that during that curing practice of mine there, when I later again became a physician hypnotist there and existed mostly on the continent called Europe, and on other countries situated near to it, almost half of my patients consisted of those who were ill only because of this said maleficent science of theirs which had become widely spread there. And this was obtained because when these learned beings of new formation began writing various books about these questions with every kind of fantastic theory, many ordinary beings there began to read them and became crazy with their fantasies and themselves began trying to evoke this hypnotic state in each other. And as a result, they brought themselves to the point of becoming my patients. Among such patients of mine were the wives of husbands who, having chanced to read these books, wished to suggest to their wives their egoistic wishes. For similar reasons, children of unreasonable parents became my patients. Various men who were found to be under the orders, or as it is said there, under the thumb of their mistresses, and so on and so forth. And all this only thanks to the fact that these sorry learned beings of new formation cooked up their Hasnamussian theories concerning this distressing state of theirs. None of the theories now current among them concerning this question of hypnotism even approximate in the least the reality. Most recently, by the way, when I was on this ill-fated planet, a new maleficent means began to flourish, there for doing the same with the psyche of the beings there, as there did and still does this branch of their science hypnotism. And this new maleficent means they call psychoanalysis. You must without fail also know that when beings of the period of the Tikliamishian civilization constated for the first time about this particular psychic property of theirs, and soon made it clear that by its means they could destroy in each other certain properties particularly unbecoming to be in them, then the process itself of bringing someone into this state began to be regarded by them as a sacred process, and was performed only in their temples before the congregation. But in the presences of your contemporary favorites, not only does there absolutely not arise any being impulse of contrition about this essential property of theirs, and not only do they not consider its concentrated manifestation intentionally yet unavoidably evoked by them as sacred, but they have already adapted it, the process itself and the accidentally obtained results, for serving them as a means of tickling certain consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer firmly fixed in them. For instance, even when they meet together for one or another established patriarchal ritual like a wedding, baptism, Saint's Day, and so on, one of the great diversions is trying to bring one another into the said state. It is lucky that they still do not know, and it must be hoped that they never will know, other methods besides the one first discovered by the beings of the community Italy, the Abbot Pedrini and the Doctor Bambini, namely the gazing at a shining, brilliant object, by means of which method, as I've already told you, certain of them can indeed be brought into such a mentioned concentrated state.